and gentlemen, I'm very proud now to introduce our next speaker, and it's going to be about some trends, and they're misleading trends, and there's 10 more for you to test, and we're again very lucky today to have Sir Martin Sorrell, the CEO of WPP, clearly one of the largest communications companies in the world, unbelievable level of participation. I know I asked him this last night, but you know, to have 140,000 people in your company and basically building that company from scratch is an accomplishment that goes well beyond any of us could ever imagine. You're breaking my schema on that. Many different companies that you know about, $7.5 billion worth of business, 2,400 offices in 107 countries. Just unbelievable overall results. And again, on behalf of all of us, we're very proud to have Sir Martin here with us today.
Thank you. I think I should break your schema. You said 7.5 billion. It's a little bit of an underestimate. Last time I checked, it was 15 billion. So dollar. We're talking about dollars? No. We'll start at... So, and break your schema again, Tom, because I have to start a little bit because I was looking at the speakers' bios and I was pretty appalled by what they said about WPP and yours truly. So I'm going to break the schema on that too. It's a media portfolio of about $75 billion. So we manage the planning and buying, what we call media investment management, for about $75 billion. That's not my figure, that's RECMA, which is a French-based research company. And if it's French-based, you must believe it. Brands include Young & Rubicam, Ogilvy, JWT, other brands, Hill & Knowlton, Burson Marsteller, T&S, Millward Brown. We'll go on a little bit about it. The reason I say this is that I should start by talking a little bit about where WPP started, because we started, as you did say correctly, 25 years ago from zero. To break the schema again, we were a wire basket manufacturer. Somebody asked me last night, what did WPP stand for? And to totally confuse you, it stands for wire and plastic products. So actually, there are connections to packaged goods, because we still make shopping baskets. We actually make pots and pans, saucepans, tea sets, still do. In 1985, we were a £1 million, so about $1.5 million at current exchange rates, market cap company. Today, we're a £10 billion. You said one of the leading marketing services, and we are by quite some distance the largest. So I just want to get that on the table. Because, you know, I'm confused. You know, P&G is the world's largest advertising and advertiser. I would have thought the market research was a little bit better than that. So I just want to set the record straight. Anyway, that's not combative or competitive. You couldn't have seen it. That certainly wouldn't be the schema, would it? If there's one thing that you should remember from what I'm going to say, and there'll probably be only one thing that you remember, it's our strategy. I fundamentally believe that the great clients that we've worked with, the common characteristics is that the CEO, in American parlance, usually the chairman and CEO, because in the UK we have this quaint thing of splitting chairman and CEOs in terms of responsibilities. The common characteristics is that the chairman and CEO or CEO has a very clear and simple vision and has a very strong CMO to implement that vision. That's it, as far as I'm concerned. And I give you two examples, present company excluded, of course, of that at work. The first would be IBM in 1992, when Lou Gerstner took over with Abby Constam. Interestingly, he spent about 2 years sorting out the plan. You may remember that people said, when he came in, split the company up. And what he did do was pull it all together, which was completely counterintuitive. He had Abby to implement a vision, which he started to implement in 1994. He had 42 advertising agencies, He fired 42, and thankfully he appointed Ogilvy, which is another one of our great brands. And Ogilvy has been working with IBM ever since then. And that mantle has been taken on by Sam Parmisano and John Iwata. That would be one example. The other example would be Ford, our largest client, where under Alan Mulally came in about 2 or 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. He did the counterintuitive thing. First thing he did was he fixed the funding, which people said was crazy, but it was pre-Lehman, and it turned out to be very prophetic. And he jettisoned all the premium brands, if you remember, Jaguar, Land Rover, Aston Martin, Volvo, which again was counterintuitive, because under Jack Nasser, the theory was that you made money in the car business by selling premium vehicles. And he concentrated on the blue oval brand, the Ford brand, which again was counterintuitive because it seemed to be a little bit down market. And now he's creating, we launched the Focus a few weeks ago, which is the first world car, the first one platform car that, with different top hats, that Ford has produced, mimicking, ironically, Toyota at a time when, of course, they had a product recall. I mean, the blessing about having 5 Fiestas was that if one went wrong, you had another 4. So anyway, counterintuitive. But again, Alan had a very simple strategy, which he implemented with a very strong CMO, Jim Farley, and a very strong management team led by Mark Field. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. So, now, I say that because our vision is very simple. It's one sentence: new markets, new media, and consumer insight. And the new markets are obviously the BRICS and Next 11, or if you want to confuse things, as The Economist confuses things usually, you call them the civets, so Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey, South Africa. So those markets. And Bob and P&G obviously are embarked, like many others, on trying to engage with those consumers, those new consumers, as they expand around the world. That's one thing. New media. You heard a lot about that previously, about the benefits of social networking. But it's not just PC-based, it's mobile-based, it's social networks, it's video content, which is driving our business. And last but not least, it's consumer insight. And by consumer insight, I mean 2 things. One is data analytics, because information is no longer power. The marginal cost of information to the consumer is 0 now. The classic phrase was, information is power. If I was talking to you 5, 10, 15 years ago, we may have said that information is power. That's no longer the case, because everybody has access to massive amounts of information. It's what you do with the data. It's the analysis that you make up is critical. And lastly, it's the application of technology in the context of that. We were discussing last night, and this is somewhat controversial, so I don't retreat from controversy, actually, many times. The technology companies are not technology companies. These are the new media owners masquerading as technology companies. Google, Yahoo, Facebook, Twitter are not agnostic. They have channels that they are developing and pushing. I referred to our $75 billion media portfolio. Our responsibility is to make sure that is the right amount of money that our clients are investing in media of whatever kind. It could be more than 75, it could be less than 75, but making sure that the channels in which they invest are the right channels. So that's why we call it media investment management. It's just like managing an investment portfolio. So that's what it is. If you just remember that, that's what we think the world's about. Now, a lot of people talk about trends, and I'm going to run through very quickly 10, because Tammy threatened to put on her witch's hat if I outstay my welcome. Let me just run through quickly 10 things that we see happening that may or may not be of value to you and that you agree with. The first I've touched on. By the way, just backing up for a minute, just want to say one thing. If I look at WPP, I look at that $15 billion of revenue last year. It's going to be $16 billion this year. The pattern has changed very significantly from 5 or 10 years ago, even though we started 25 years ago with 2 people in one room. It's changed very significantly. Today, 30% of our revenues, 30% of that 15 billion comes from the BRICS and Next 11. We will cross $1 billion of revenue in China this year. We have 12,000 people in China, Greater China, including Taiwan and Hong Kong. That's one thing. 30% of our revenues are coming from new media. 10 years ago, it was zero, basically. And 25% of our revenues are coming from consumer insight. So digital plus consumer insight is half of our business. That's how it's changed. Our objective is for at least 35, 40% of our business to come from those new markets and the new media. Consumer insight and digital is probably at the right level together. So let me just run through the 10 very quickly. The first is the one I've touched on already, which is globalization. Everybody talks about it. It used to be about Americanization. It was never about what Professor Levitt said at HBS in 1983. It was more, it's deeper and probably more profound about that. And it's not just a shift to the east, it's a shift to the south, to Latin America. You know, this is the decade of Latin America in our view. Brazil will host the Olympics and the World Cup, and that will have a dramatic impact on the way the world sees Brazil and Latin America, just like the World Cup in South Africa had a dramatic impact in the way the world sees South Africa and Africa, or the Beijing Olympics changed people's thoughts about China and indeed Asia. So it's a shift to the east, it's a shift to the south, and it's a shift to the southeast, because don't forget about Africa and the Middle East. If you said to me, where are we seeing the greatest explosion of client interest at the moment, it is in Africa and the Middle East, despite the political problems, or maybe it's as a result of the political problems or opportunities, because there may not be problems, in North Africa and the Middle East. So that's the first. And by the way, I just make one little subset comment. In Europe, you know, the hospital pass in most organizations is to be given responsibility for Western Europe, if you understand what a hospital pass is. In rugby, when you get the man and the ball at the same time, it's called a hospital pass. Most people do not succeed in organizations when they get Western Europe. If you look at Europe as a whole, there's a shift in the balance of power to the east. Germany, Poland, and Russia, I'm going to use the word axis, it's an unfortunate word, but that's the more powerful axis. Russia works at $60 to $70 a barrel oil price. At $100, they make out like bandits. And Germany, Poland, and Russia, you're seeing a shift in the balance of power, I think, in Eastern Europe, which has big issues for France, for Spain, and for Italy. Maybe not so much the UK. I'm not saying that because I come from the UK, but I do think the coalition government has got to grips with deficit reduction in a way that the administration, even here in America, has not done yet, certainly in front of a general election coming up in 2012. So that's one thing. Second thing is, what do we see in the world generally in all categories, with very few exceptions, is significant overcapacity in terms of manufacturing. If I take Ford as our largest client in the car and truck industry, well, the interesting thing is that there is still capacity in the world to produce 80 million cars and trucks. There is still only consumer demand at around 60 million units. What's happened very interestingly is, despite what happened to the big three, and remember Ford was the only brand, the only company that didn't take government money, there has been a contraction of capacity in the West and in Detroit, very near to here. But what's happened also has been expansion in capacity in India with Tata Motors, not just acquiring Jaguar and Land Rover, but also Nano, the new vehicle that we launched in India, the new cheap vehicle, with Hyundai, the Samsung of the car industry, with the Chinese, you know, the Jack brand launched in Brazil a few months ago, and the expansion of all the Chinese brands around the world. Chinese car industry is the biggest car market in the world, more than 20 million units. American market peaked at 18, it's gone back to 12, probably will go back to 15 million units, but will never be the biggest in the world again. So you've got this significant overcapacity still in most categories, which means that what we do, what you do, in terms of advertising and marketing, creating differentiation on a psychological, emotional, or tangible basis is critically important. But where's the shortage? The shortage is not in productive capacity. The shortage is in talent and people. We see a world that's growing from 6.5 billion to 7 billion people, and will grow further. But if you look at every market, even a market like Mexico or Pakistan, with 185 million people, a very young age profile, at some point in time in the near future, the aging of the population changes, and elongation of life through healthcare improvements means that the age profiles are significantly going to change, and that the profiles are going to get older and older. So this means that the demand for talent is going to get greater, and companies will increasingly be differentiated by the way they recruit, keep, motivate, incentivize, train people. That is the battleground. People talk about a war for talent now. Just stand by. It's going to get worse. That's the battlefield. Third issue is the web, and I think you've had major presentations. I mean, the web does three things. It disintermediates a legacy business model. It disintermediates with a lower cost business model. And going back to the talent point, it's a much more attractive destination for young people. People coming out of university are much more attracted, out of good schools, film schools, art schools, design schools, are much more attracted to smaller, less bureaucratic, more responsive companies. And those happen to be the technology companies. The fourth point is retail. You know, people don't talk about this very much. It's a bit like the tension that exists between the media owners and us as media buyers or on behalf of our clients. But the retailers and the manufacturers are increasingly coming into conflict. The way I look at it, you know, Walmart is the 7th largest country in the world by retail sales, just behind China. Walmart, Tesco, Carrefour are building worldwide operations. Tesco today has more than 50% of its floor space outside the UK, not more than 50% of its profits, by the way, much less than 50% of its profits. But that tension and that pressure between the manufacturers and the retailers is going to intensify. That's why channel marketing, trade marketing is becoming more and more important. But there is an inherent tension there. I mean, I was fascinated that Procter bought 8% of Ocado, the home shopping, food shopping operation in the UK. It struck me that that was a brilliant move to try and establish a much closer relationship with the consumer. By the way, what is the company that knows most about consumers in terms of research? It's Tesco. Tesco owns a company called dunnhumby. I remember when I don't know whether Jill Barrow is still here, but I remember I asked Indra Nui at Pepsi a couple of years ago, what is your best source of information about the consumer in America? And she said Kroger. And it's the Kroger-dunnhumby JV. Tesco own dunnhumby. They own 100% of it now. Casino has a JV with dunnhumby. These JVs between retailers, I mean, retailers understand consumers more because they're in day-to-day contact with them. Manufacturers think their consumers are the trade, not the consumers that are in the stores. And that's why we've seen in this last recession post-Lehman, retailers have a much better understanding of what the dynamics that are happening with the consumer and the changes in the price-value relationship. The fifth thing that we see is internal communications becoming more and more important. The central strategic challenge for any chairman/CEO is communicating strategic and structural change internally. Now, we are a company that in 25 years has gone from 0, basically, to 145,000 people, and we're multi-branded and we've grown by acquisition. That is the most difficult model to manage. Uni-branded models that have grown organically, and organic growth is by far the strongest way of growing. I mean, that may come strangely from somebody who's over the last 25 years tried to build a major marketing services company principally by acquisition, but the reason I did that was the only way I could do it in my lifetime. You know, organic growth is stronger, but it's slower. But managing a uni-branded company organically grown is easier. It's no accident that McKinsey and Goldman Sachs, I know Goldman Sachs is not a popular brand to talk about in this day and age, but there's no accident that they are strong and powerful companies. And in fact, interestingly, both companies, when they make acquisition, usually fail. I remember when I was at Saatchi's, we had a company called ISG, which was bought by McKinsey. It disappeared very quickly. They bought a company called Envision in Chicago in the identity business, disappeared very quickly. It's almost like an amoeba. You know, rejects foreign bodies. Goldman with Jay Aaron did exactly the same thing. Hank Paulson had to go in and tear it apart and put it back together again. But managing these companies and communicating strategic and structural change is particularly difficult, and that's a big challenge. A sixth trend that we see is a focus on global versus local in terms of structure. Whilst it is true that if you have the pendulum between concentration or centralization and localization, whilst it's true that generally the pendulum in most organizations is moving towards greater centralization, what we see, primarily because of the growth of technology and the ability to disseminate information in a much more networked fashion, what we see is that move to centralization, but at the same time a move to localization too. And it's the regional stuff that's getting constricted and reduced. I think Steve referred to a spirits company, and I don't know whether he was talking about Diageo, but Diageo did an interesting thing a few weeks ago. Paul Walsh rationalized his organization, eliminated a lot of regional overhead and infrastructure, had more central, more local. You know, one of the things I just mentioned, it is ludicrous in my view that companies, including our own, I'll come on to country managers in a second, have a country manager for China and then have a country manager for Portugal or Singapore with 5 million people. China's 1.3 billion people. It may be 1.5 billion. We'll see what the results of the Chinese census show us. It's ludicrous that we manage them in the same way. So what we're starting to see is more centralization but more localization. So what we're doing is, you know, Tamara Ingram runs P&G, which is our second largest client to Ford. I should congratulate her because she got an OBE from the Queen today in the Queen's Honor List. Where is Tan? Stand up. It's very, very quaint. We call it Order of the British Empire. The ex-British Empire, I should say. But this